The idea of a young woman from the countryside meeting her lover in the local barn, hoping to run off and live together in a town away from her family, might sound like the climax to a rather cliched romance novel. But in this case, rather than the start of a new life, it was the tragic end of one, and would become a murder that would equally horrify and fascinate the country. The Red Barn Murder. Maria Martin was born on the 21st of July 1801 in the small village of Polstead. Her father was the local mole catcher. Her mother died when she was 9, and her father remarried a woman 20 years his junior. It is reported that she was pretty and was also literate, which was unusual for a country girl like her at the time, and she had gained a taste for the finer things in life after working for some of the village's richer residents. One local described her as having been blessed with a very retentive memory and her mind deeply imbued with a desire to acquire useful knowledge. There is every reason to believe that had she received proper tuition, she would have made an accomplished woman. A travelling fortune teller who visited the village once told her he saw great fortune and many lovers in her future, but she was not to reach old age. She was in her early 20s when she fell in love and started a relationship with William Corder. He was not her first love. She had had relationships with 2 men before, including William's older brother, and had been pregnant twice, but only one of these children had lived. The father of the surviving child had declined to marry her, but regularly gave her money for upkeep of the child. The first of the predictions had come true. William Corder was 22 years old when he began to see Maria. The son of a local yeoman farmer, he was slender, well-built, with a fair complexion, and stood about 5'4" tall. A flashy dresser, with expensive tastes and a poor grasp on money. He was viewed locally as a fraudster and a ladies' man, and he had gained the nickname Foxy while at Hadley boarding school due to his cunning and untrustworthy nature. He sold his own father's pigs for some quick cash without permission, but this was sorted out in the family without need to involve the law. But his later crimes of passing forged checks and stealing a neighbour's pig, he wouldn't be so lucky, with a local constable even making a rather grim prediction. "I'll be damned if he will not be hung some of these days." Due to the growing scandal around him and his family, he was given some money and sent away to London, where, rather than find some honest work, he soon fell in with petty criminals. But his stay there would not be long. He would soon be called home after his elder brother and the current lover of Maria drowned while trying to cross a frozen pond. His return home would bring a run of bad luck with him. Within 18 months of his arrival, his father and his 2 other brothers had all died. He would begin his own relationship with Maria during this time. William had hoped to keep their relationship a secret, but Maria soon fell pregnant. She gave birth in 1827 and became very eager that they should marry as soon as possible. Sadly, her child would die shortly after birth. There have been rumours that William actually did away with the child, but at this time child mortality was high, especially in rural areas, and William still showed interest in marrying Maria, so I wouldn't put much stock in these ideas. In the late spring of 1827, William claimed he'd heard rumours around the village that the local parish officers were going to prosecute Maria for having children out of wedlock, and that it would be a good idea for them to elope the village to the town of Ipswich as soon as possible, where they could start over as man and wife. Originally, they were going to leave on the Wednesday night, but for reasons which aren't entirely clear, William kept postponing until Friday, the 18th of May, when he abruptly turned up at their cottage door, telling Maria and her stepmother that the local constable had been given the warrant to prosecute her, and they had to leave immediately. No evidence of this warrant has ever been found. Maria was obviously worried about being caught, and wanted to wait until dark, but William was insistent there was no time for that, telling her to pack a bag and dress in male clothing. He would take her bags to the Red Barn, and she would follow along shortly, as a lone man walking the country lanes would raise no suspicion. After William's departure, Maria waited a while before bidding goodbye to her stepmother and leaving herself. It was a half-mile walk to the Red Barn on Barnfield Hill. The door closing behind her, it was the last time Maria was ever seen alive. There was little suspicion to begin with of any foul play, and William remained in the local area, telling Maria's family that she was staying with some friends in Norfolk, and for a time even helping bringing in the harvest into the Red Barn, before leaving to be with her, telling her father and stepmother that they would write often. Soon the first letters arrived from William, informing that he and Maria had been married in Ipswich and were now living nearby, but he refused to return to Polstead with her, claiming that in doing so would cause nothing but anger from friends and family, leading to undue distress to his bride, as well as there were many excuses to why it was only ever him that wrote, from sickness to Maria injuring her writing hand. But Maria's stepmother, Anne, soon became very insistent on seeing her again. This kind of provocation soon led to a letter arriving from William, telling how he and Maria were now moved and living on the Isle of Wight. It is here that the story takes a rather interesting turn. Anne began to have strange dreams, where a ghostly figure of Maria guided her to the Red Barn, She would have the same dream night after night for 3 nights. She was finally able to convince her husband to go and search the barn. On the 19th of April, 1828, almost a year after Maria was last seen, while digging through the floor in the exact place that William had made sure the harvest had been placed the year before, he found the badly decomposing body, fulfilling the second fortune. An inquest into this body was held in the local pub, the Cock Inn. Although decomposed, the body was able to be identified as Maria through the clothes she was wearing and a missing tooth, and around her neck a green handkerchief was found, an item that was known to belong to William. The hunt for William began. Ayres, the local constable, was able to find his new address in London through one of his friends, and with the aid of a London police officer, James Lee, who would go on to be involved in the infamous Spring Hill Jack case 9 years later, they set out to find him. At this time, William Corder was now running a boarding house out of Everley Grove House in Brentwood with his new wife, Mary Moore. The police gained access to the property, claiming they were looking for a room to rent, and surprised William while having breakfast. When arrested, he denied all knowledge, not only of the crime, but of even knowing Maria. A search of the house uncovered a pair of pistols bought on the day of the murder, letters from friends back in Suffolk warning him that he was being looked for, and evidence that he was getting ready to flee to France. Taken back to Suffolk, he was held in Bury St Edmunds before his trial was to take place on the 7th of August, 1827. The case had gained huge amounts of interest across the nation, leading to tickets having to be sold to the public gallery, and hotels across the town had been fully booked since July of people who wished to view the trial. Even with the ticket sales, members of the court were forced to push their way through huge crowds outside in order to gain entry to the building. Judge William Alexander, who oversaw the trial, was notably displeased by the amount of attention the case had gained in the public eye due to the press, believing it would prejudice the case. During the initial days, William pleaded innocent. The cause of Maria's death couldn't be fully identified due to the state her body was in when it was found, but the nearest they could work out is that something sharp had pierced her eye socket, either a knife or it could have possibly been a gunshot wound, and there was always strangulation that couldn't be ruled out, and the damage being caused to her eye when the body was found. But what was clear is the court was desperate to convict William on something, and he was indicted on 9 charges, ranging from murdering Maria Martin by feloniously and willfully shooting her with a pistol through the body and likewise stabbing her with a dagger, to forgery. The evidence from Maria's family came thick and fast, and described the rushed arrival of William and his plans to make Maria leave, followed by her long-running dreams that led to the discovery of the body. Tom Marden described the day he dug up his daughter's remains, and even Maria's 10-year-old brother told how he saw William with a pistol before the murder, and later coming out of the barn carrying a pickaxe. The next to take the stand was Officer James Lee, who told of the manner of the arrest and the items found in the house, ranging from the pistols to the passport to France. The final argument from the prosecution was that William never had any intention of marrying poor Maria, but she had found out about his criminal dealings and were holding them over his head until he did, which led him to murder her. When William took the stand, he described a very different set of events. He admitted they met in the Red Barn, but it soon devolved into an argument, leading him to storm off in anger. He was a short distance away from the barn when he heard the distinctive sound of a pistol shot. Running back into the barn, he found Maria dead, with the weapon laying next to her, in an apparent suicide. He buried the body in panic and began to make plans to leave the area. He practically begged the jury to believe him as they retired to make their decision. It was only a 35-minute wait, but for William it must have felt like a lifetime, and I'm sure his blood ran cold as the guilty verdict was read and the judge passed his sentence. You will be taken back to the prison from whence you came, and that you will be taken from thence, on Monday next, to the place of your execution, and that you there be hanged by the neck until you are dead, and that your body shall afterwards be dissected and autonomized, and may the Lord God Almighty, in his infinite goodness, have mercy on your soul. William would sit in prison for 3 days, waiting for his death, during which he had several meetings with the prison warden, governor, and chaplain. All tried to get him to confess to what really happened. It may have been too late to save his life, but in doing this, they were sure they would save his soul from hell. The day before his death, he would finally write a full confession of what happened. I acknowledge being guilty of the death of poor Maria Martin by shooting her with a pistol. The particulars are as follows. When we left her father's house, we began quarrelling about the burial of the child. She, apprehending that the place within it was disposed, would be found. The quarrel continued for 3/4 of an hour upon this and other subjects. A scuffle ensued, and during the scuffle, and at the time I think she had hold of me, I took the pistol from the side pocket of my valentine jacket and fired. She fell and died instantly. There was never even a struggle. I was overwhelmed with agitation and dismay. The body fell near the front doors on the floor of the barn. and a vast quantity of blood issued from the wound, and ran onto the floor and through the crevices. Having determined to bury the body in the barn, about 2 hours after she was dead, I went to borrow a spade from Mrs. Stowe, but before I went, I dragged the body from the barn into the chaff house and locked up the barn. I returned to the barn and began to dig the hole, but the spade being a bad one and the earth firm and hard, I was obliged to go home for a pickaxe and a better spade, with which I dug the hole and buried the body. I think I dragged the body by the handkerchief that was tied around her neck. It was dark when I finished covering up the body. I went the next day to wash the blood from the barn's floors. I declared to Almighty God I had no sharp implement about me, and that no other wound but the one made by the pistol was inflicted by me. I have been guilty of great idleness, and at times led a dissolute life, but I hope through the mercy of God to be forgiven. On the 11th of August, 1828, he was taken to the waiting gallows at Bury St Edmunds Gaol. Too weak to stand from fear and little sleep, he was supported by 2 guards. A crowd of anywhere from 7,000 to 20,000 had gathered to see the end of the Red Barn murderer. His final words before the hood was placed over his head were, "I am guilty, my sentence is just, I deserve my fate, and may God have mercy on my soul." A couple of moments later, the trap opened and William took the drop. He would hang for an hour to ensure death before the hangman, John Foxton, cut him down. His body was then taken back to Shire Hall, where it was cut open along the abdomen to reveal the muscles, and placed on public display for several hours, a common practice with the executors at the time, due to the fascination in the growing field of anatomy and surgery. As many as 5,000 people came to view his body. The next day, his death mask was created, a practice where wax or plaster was poured over the face of the recently deceased to capture their look. This was done with many notable people who died, from national heroes to notorious criminals. Following this, his post-mortem was carried out in front of visiting students from Cambridge University, as well as local physicians, during which it was found out he was most likely killed from pressure to the spine during the hanging rather than strangulation. His organs were removed and his skull was studied. His body was used for demonstrations. Afterwards, his skeleton was cleaned and reassembled and would go to the West Suffolk Hospital for many years, where it was used both as a teaching aid and placed in a glass case, attached to a mechanism which caused it to point to a collection box. Years later, it would be taken from here and moved to the museum in the Royal College of Surgeons. In 2004, William Corder's bones would make their final journey to be taken away and cremated. Another slightly macabre practice that took part at this time was that a portion of William's skin was taken and tanned as you would with leather, and was used to bind a small book which held the report of his crime. The murder, although now overshadowed by far more notorious ones, such as Jack the Ripper, that followed in the coming decades, was a huge national story at the time, with plays being written and even performed while William was still awaiting trial. Fictionalised versions of the case sold in book form in great numbers, and at least 5 ballad-type songs were written telling the grisly tale. The rope used to execute William was cut up and sold for guineas apiece. This craze even went as far as to have part of his scalp and one of his ears on display in a shop window in Oxford Street. In 1828 alone, 200,000 people descended on the village of Polstead, coming from as far away as Ireland. The Red Barn was stripped of almost everything, as souvenir hunters even ripped up the wooden planks to sell them. This practice would carry on, although the original Red Barn had long since been stripped by souvenir hunters until 1842, when the replacement barn burnt down, possibly done by villagers who were sick of outsiders. The most disturbing part of all this souvenir hunting is that Maria's gravestone was even targeted, chipped away to nothing, and now only a wooden plaque is placed near where they believe it was once located. And a run of fictionalised depictions of the crime would continue into the 1930s, with books, plays and radio dramas. And with this, in many ways, Maria's final fortune did indeed come true. She did make a great fortune, only it wasn't hers to spend. William's original death mask can be found at Moysey Hall Museum in Bury St Edmunds, along with several other items from the trial, including the set of pistols found when the home was searched and the book made from William's skin mentioned earlier. One of many copies made of it can also be found locally in the dungeons of Norwich Castle Museum. I hope you've enjoyed this presentation. All the information and pictures used can be found in the description below. Feel free to like and subscribe if you wish. This was the Red Barn Murder, and this was a little bit of history.